Hello, fellow wanderers. Welcome to our episode today. It is my pleasure, as always, to have you with us as we discuss the human condition, which is what we're doing in all of season 2. If you're new to our channel, we discuss the nuances of addiction, alcohol addiction in particular, and how it affects all of us in the different facets of society. If you are a regular subscriber or you've been here before, welcome back. We've missed you. It's nice to have you. Thank you so much for your patronage. It means the world to me. I am back with a guest that I hope you all loved the first time around because she's so beautiful and so soft-spoken. Her name is Muthoni, and today we're going to talk about a rather sensitive topic of mental health. I think mental health is so nuanced and so varied that I'm not sure we're going to cover everything today, but we'll do our best to be able to discuss as much as we can today. We'll discuss how mental health interacts with alcohol addiction and alcohol misuse, and the various facets of how sobriety and the journey can affect conditions like how to be mentally healthy, but also conditions like depression and anxiety. Muthoni, for those of us who are joining us today, please reintroduce yourself. Tell us why you are our guest, other than the fact that you're my very, very good friend and that you are an amazing therapist, but in the context of mental health. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we delve into how mental health and alcohol addiction intersect.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. I don't think people really see the correlation between mental health and alcohol use. I think there's always like this thing, alcohol use, and people look at the behavior around it and not really understand some of the factors that have led people to use alcohol as a way to self-soothe or how to engage with the world. So I think this is such a great topic, and I'm so glad to do this with you.
Yay! Yay! And I think a while ago I was having a conversation with a bunch of friends, and when I said mental health, the first notion they had was mental health issues, so depression and anxiety, as opposed to being mentally healthy in terms of day to day. And I think it's important to make that distinction, that mental health is a thing for all of us. It's a factor, it's a life condition for all of us. It's us understanding how to be mentally healthy as opposed to thinking about mental health in terms of it doesn't affect me, I'm not depressed, I'm not anxious, I'm not schizophrenic or any of those things. So let's create that definition or that separation of mental health disorders from just being mentally healthy.
Okay, I think that's a great place to start because if you looked at mental health like the way you look at physical health,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So are you able to navigate through the stresses of life, right? Do you have the shock absorbers, the internal resilience mechanisms, right? Do you have the ability to engage with emotions that are difficult?
Yep.
So really, that is really the scope of mental health. I think the disorders is really like, first of all, I really hate that word, disorders. I really do.
No.
Really
it makes it sound like a terrible, like almost a disability of sorts.
Right. And I know we talked about it in the other episode about the way we pathologize grief. I think we pathologize the human condition, right?
Yep.
Because this shit is hard. Oh, there I go. My first curse.
That is true. Lifing
Right?
is hard, especially
It
as an adult.
is. It is
Good
even
Lord.
as a kid, right? And so I think the problem is we lack a language that espouses curiosity and compassion. So when you talked about, people looking at mental health within the spectrum of the presence of depression or anxiety or I think you said schizophrenia, that is really a consequence, but it's not inherently who we are.
Yep.
So if we're talking about definition, then I think we want to look at it as the illness as a consequence of some type of misalignment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Misalignment.
Misalignment. Yeah.
In the healthy state of
In the
things.
in the cognitive, in the brain, the behavioral, the social aspect, right?
Yeah.
So I think that may be, I don't know if that makes sense in terms of
It does.
in terms of
It does. It
looking
gives a
at
starting
definitions.
point of,
Yeah.
of what we're thinking and what we're looking at.
Right.
In terms when we start talking about mental health in general, in espousing the misalignment on the times when people are misaligned, but also in terms of, I love that word, shock absorbers. When you have the shock absorbers when life lifes. I love that expression when, when life is lifing and it's, whooping you behind thoroughly, but having those shock absorbers to be able to navigate the inevitability of life's hard times, but even the good times, because no one says good times you don't have to navigate through them. We always associate navigating with hard times. Who says we don't need to navigate good times?
I'm so glad you are talking about that, because in these conversations of alcohol misuse, we rarely talk about the experience of joy, right?
Yes.
Joy, of curiosity, of awe, of wonder, right?
Yep.
So it's always this thing that is so,
Yes. Yes.
I don't have a word,
Yes.
but
no, I absolutely agree with you, because that's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's this notion of, we don't talk about, because the expectation is when you're joyful, you're not navigating anything. And I know, like, personally, I've had a problem handling two emotions at the same time. How you can be joyous and happy,
Right.
but something at the same time is saddening you, right? Of feeling sad about one aspect of your life and then feeling happy about another, and then trying to navigate the guilt that comes with, why am I feeling happy on this side and feeling sad on the other? I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and the conversation was, she was like, yeah, Wendy, I have all of these parts of my life figured out, and I'm feeling bad that I don't have this one part figured out. And I'm like, you can coexist. Those things can coexist, that one part is not working as ideally as you'd like,
Right.
and the other parts are.
But isn't it, that has always been the question, hasn't it? I mean, the idea of how do you navigate the middle path, right? If you look at, we look at even our religious texts, for instance, like in the Old Testament, that book that talks about there's a time for this and a time for that and a time for this and a time for that,
Yes.
right? But I wonder then how that stuff plays out with mental health in relation to alcohol use, right? How do we navigate the human experience when we've been broken open? Because life has opened us in ways that threaten to drown us. Yeah?
Which is almost the entire experience of adulting.
Even kids. I don't know why people forget about kids.
I feel like kids, that's the most innocent time, right? I kind of feel like that. Or am I idealizing, children growing up?
Yes.
I am, okay.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Yes. Maybe that's something worth talking about.
It
Right?
might be something
Think
we're
we're
talking
talking
about, because for me, I'm
right?
always like, being an adult is so much work. And when I think about childhood, I think about innocence. I think about how easy it is to be a child. But you're right. You're right. When you think about it, even children have to navigate, because growing up is a navigation all on its own. When you're figuring out boundaries, oh gosh. Okay, that's an interesting topic to look at. We're going to focus on mental health for today and then continue with that.
Right.
But I guess the next logical question is, how then is alcohol misuse and alcohol abuse, how does then that interact with our mental health? Or now let's talk about mental health in general, espousing when the misalignment happened. How does alcohol kind of fit, how does it interact? I don't want to say fit, because I don't want to normalize it also, because I don't really think in an ideal world, mental health was ever supposed to be given a crutch by alcohol.
No. I I think I want to talk about like the underbelly when you started off in
Yes.
terms of disorders, right?
Yeah.
I think what a lot of people don't understand, especially for people who are dealing with mood disorders, what alcohol actually gives you,
Please
right?
continue.
I always think about it gives people, some people like who are dealing with social anxiety, for instance, crippling anxiety. And then number one, because alcohol, the way it interacts with the brain, it just calms shit down,
It does.
doesn't it?
It does, because I think I
Right?
can say this from my personal perspective. I had, at least, I use past tense because I'm hoping it's in the past. I had major self-esteem issues.
Yeah.
Right? I grew up feeling like I was a girl next door who, nobody saw, nobody noticed, and I never felt pretty. But then alcohol made me feel like I'm the center of the party and I'm the center of everybody's world, girl. I am the girl. Like, first of all, I could drink anyone under the table, which already got me a seat of honor among the boys because I could drink better than any female around. But it also made me feel
Yeah.
important. It made me feel beautiful. It made me feel intelligent. I could have philosophical conversations that would last hours, and people the next day would be like, "Oh my God, that conversation yesterday was so powerful." I couldn't remember it because I was so high, and it just felt good to be drinking and having that confidence because it gave me that extra boost, right?
Yeah.
I'm on the dance floor feeling like I am the
Yeah.
ish. I don't think I am, but when I was drunk, when I was sober, when I first got into the club or the party, I'd be in the corner,
Right.
right? The more I drank, the more I opened up. Think imagery, think a flower, literally, just slowly opening up as the night progresses.
Right.
By the end of the night, I know everybody in the room because I've gone around and introduced myself. I know who's who, I know who's connected to who. And it gave me that extra boost because then I could get out of my shell and not have to worry about it. So I totally relate to you saying that because it was crippling social anxiety. And as I've navigated sobriety, because I like to remind my viewers that I've only been sober about 5 years. I'm going to be 5 years this November. So I still have a long way to go.
Right.
And as I've navigated sobriety, I've noticed that's still one of my biggest challenges, getting into a social environment and kind of intentionally wanting to stand up and be seen and fight that urge to kind of shrink and not be seen.
I mean, that sounds like alcohol was such a good friend.
It was. She was
Right?
loyal. We were.
I mean,
we were
think about
tight.
it. I
We
mean,
were
think about it,
buddies.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. That is a friend that emboldened you, the friend that loved you, the friend that valued you.
Never judged me.
Never judged you. Thought you were amazing. I mean, who wouldn't want to be friends with alcohol?
I know. I
Right.
know.
Right?
Yep.
Yes. And so when we're talking about how do we support folks in expanding their resources so that alcohol is not their only friend, but they have other tools, other friends as well.
Yep.
I think that's where the work is, right? Do you know? So what other tools do you have? What other friends do you have now that you're no longer with alcohol?
I had to open up my social circle,
Right.
which in itself was difficult because then there's trust issues that come into, again, life is life. People are in your life for a reason, a season, and a lifetime. But losing a friend always gets your trust and you get your guard back up.
Right.
And so having to intentionally build relationships and opening up your heart is something I've had to learn with sobriety. Being vulnerable. I say that the way I say it because before, vulnerable was a very dirty word for me because I was like, being vulnerable hurts. Being vulnerable means I give somebody else the power to hurt me,
Right.
which is really, really hard because you're like, I'm giving this person power to inflict pain on me if they choose to. But it's also been a really rewarding experience because I've established or put effort into relationships. When I was drinking, I didn't need to. I had my drinking buddies, which we had alcohol. we had a shared friend. Suddenly, I need to actually go out and make friends and actually be honest and be willing to open up and be willing to let others catch me as opposed to always being this stoic person. I always joke that I would be drunker than everybody else. But because I was so wired and the empath in me, I was also the person making sure everybody got home at the end of the night. I was always the one taking care of everybody until I got home and I blacked out right inside my own doorway. And so in terms of coping mechanisms, recognizing my triggers has also carried me a really long way. And of course, faith for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but faith has been a big anchor for me in grounding me in those moments. I'm just kind of like, Lord, give me strength for the next hour. Just 1 hour. And it helps, get me cope with that intense. I know people who are on sobriety journey will understand this, but there are times when my anxiety will make me want to drink. I can taste it. Like I can taste it at the back of my throat. I want it so bad. And then, so I have to lean on my coping mechanisms that I've had to establish and work through and be like, if I can just do the next hour.
Right.
Because suddenly I feel small, or I've walked into this room where everybody seems to know what they're doing except me.
Right. First, you are incredibly brave. And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Right? And I think people who actually recognize first to themselves that maybe they need a little bit of support are one of the bravest people I know. Because you and I know that underneath the alcohol use is the stuff.
Yep.
It's the stuff, right? And when we're talking about mental health and mental health disorders and all that, that's the stuff. And, being able to break up with this loyal friend called alcohol.
Yes.
To go and excavate the stuff. That's the first thing. Then the other thing, when you were talking about how sometimes the longing is so intense that you can literally taste it. Isn't it amazing how our brain works?
Yes.
Because, and when we're talking about this is my experience. This is
share.
my thoughts.
Yes.
Is when we are talking about alcohol use and recovery, part of the things we have to think about is how do we support the brain in creating new neural pathways, right? Because imagine you're competing with the memory of that first drink that tasted so fucking good.
Yep.
And how it made you feel, right? So there is the thought, and then there is the behavior, and then there's the experiential experience in your body. That is what you're working with.
Yep.
So even the idea of people say, wacha tu kukunywa.
That drives me. I'll get back to that, but continue. Yes.
Right? That doesn't work.
Yes.
That doesn't work. It is not a question of willpower. Right?
Amen to that. I will even snap my fingers for that one.
Not a question of willpower, because if it was, then we would not be here, would we?
That I have touched on it in season 1, and I said we need to stop telling people to just quit. We need to stop telling people to just stop going to bars. We need to stop making it sound like it's just so easy for people to wake up and quit, because if it was, we would not be where we're at today globally.
Yes.
With addiction becoming one of the top 5 causes of death, of some of the diseases that affect people. and the impacts, even the societal impacts of addiction across the board, are because it's not easy for somebody to just wake up and
No.
say, I'm not drinking anymore. It's
No.
not that easy.
It is not. It is not. And so when we're looking at recovery, right, it has to be multi-systemic.
It is.
It has to be multi-systemic, and it has to involve cognitive support,
It does.
right?
It does.
Yes, and so let's go back to the idea of someone dealing with a mental illness, like you're talking about. No, I hate that word. I hate that word. Okay, when you're navigating anxiety.
Yes.
Okay, and then now you have this amazing friend called alcohol, and your friend is amazing. And whenever you're with alcohol, you feel you can talk to everyone, you can say anything, right? And now you're telling someone, okay, you have to no longer be with alcohol. But what are you going to replace that alcohol
space
with?
Yep.
And does it also telling me to no longer, whatever, alcohol and whatever, what about the anxiety? It's still there.
Yep.
What about the depressive stupors? They're still there. What about the manic episodes? They're still there, right? Not manic, more like depressive episodes,
Depressive
right?
episodes, yes.
They're still there, right? So the thing is I think we have to recognize, for a lot of us, what alcohol does for us, it quietens the mind. And so the solution, the support, has to do with the brain. How can we provide an alternative to quieten the mind so that you don't have to only have alcohol as a friend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also the fact that the brain, this is for people who've been drinking alcohol or misusing alcohol for a long time.
Right.
These are pathways that have formed and kind of set for
Right.
decades, right? And suddenly you're asking the brain to form new
Ati.
neural pathways
Ati.
to doing things easily, when the brain is like, but we've established this is the shortest,
Right.
most efficient way to do this, even though it's not the best. But the
Right.
brain is like, this is what we've been doing the whole time. And suddenly you're saying, we don't need to do this, we need to do it this way.
And considering the rewards.
Right?
Right, and
this always feels good.
Oh my God, it does feel good. And a little dopamine hits. You're like,
Yes.
wait, and you right. And so this is what we're talking about, right? We cannot have a conversation or create structures of support that doesn't look at what does alcohol help the person in.
Yes.
Right? What does it do? Right? And then, not to mention, which I think we may have touched a little bit when we talked about grief, is also about the impact of trauma.
I was going to go right there next. I was going to say, let's talk about mental health and trauma and how it intersects. So continue. That's where I was
That's
heading
where
to.
you're going?
Yes. Yes, the impact of trauma.
Okay, great. So let me preface by saying one of my greatest teachers in terms of looking at trauma in relation to behavior, in relation to alcohol use, is Gabor Mate's work.
Oh, I love his work. I love his work. He
Yeah.
talks and I'm like, that makes
Yes.
sense. And he simplifies it so much.
Doesn't
Yeah.
it? Right. And what I like about his work, and that has really informed me, as not just as a practitioner, but just as a person doing life, is the curiosity. Because it's the idea of what does alcohol give you, right? Because it's giving you something.
Yeah, it gives a lot. It gives a lot, darling.
It gives a lot, right? And so you talked about trauma, right? And we all know that trauma is not necessarily the event, but the impact of the event, the impact.
Yes.
Right? So it doesn't have to be like at Sijui, a big thing, Sijui, then you're like, oh my God.
Yes.
It can be minuscule as, let's say you are 6 years old and your mother left you in the house by yourself for 2 hours and there was no steamer. Sorry, you may have non-Swahili speakers. So your mother left you.
They will learn Swahili. Our viewers will learn Swahili.
I was. Right?
Yeah.
And so your mother left you for 2 hours and there was no power and it was dark. And when she came back, she found you crying and she hit you or whatever, right? And
Ooh,
asked you, what are you
that,
crying
yeah,
about?
I'll give you something to cry about.
Let me give you something to cry about. Kanino nalia, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yes?
yeah.
And then so imagine those seeds of being abandoned.
And you carry it because at that point you can't process it.
Right.
You've been punished for feeling something that's utterly normal for a 6-year-old.
Absolutely. Right.
But that leaves a mark on you
Yes.
that you carry because you are then conflicted on whether fear of darkness is actually a bad thing for you to get
Yeah.
punished over.
Right.
But the fact that you still fear the dark.
Right.
Yeah.
Just what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing when we talk about trauma, right?
Right.
As therapists or as coaches, there's this notion of the layman when we say trauma, it has to be this big,
Like a big thing.
right? So you have your big things, but you have the small things that leave indelible marks.
Right.
And the thing is, these small marks build up, right, to become this big thing.
Yeah.
And this is not, and this is why I tell people, you don't need to compete on trauma. It's not a competition. We all carry our own traumas.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be this major thing that you're talking about. And people are like, yeah, but it's nothing compared to what you went through. I'm like, but no, it's not a competition. There's no big trauma and small trauma. It's trauma, right? It might feel small because you're like, oh, but it's not as bad as so-and-so who was SA'd, for example. And you're like, yeah, mine feels small. And I'm like, no, if it left a mark on you, it's traumatic.
Yeah. It's
right?
traumatic, right? I mean, that's the thing, right? And there is absolutely no hierarchy of suffering.
That.
There isn't.
I think we need to tell people more of that.
Right. There's no hierarchy to suffering.
Yeah.
Because then that does it limit it minimizes. I think that's the
That's the
word.
word.
It minimizes someone's experience, right? And so if you think your nini wasn't, oh wow, sorry, that is so Kenyan, isn't it? Your nini wasn't nini.
Yes, it was like your nini was not big enough. It was not.
Your
It's not valid
big.
enough to even be spoken of.
Right. Right. And it's interesting you say it's spoken of because I think when you think about our, what fortifies us and what builds resilience when it comes to our mental health and our mental sort of resourcefulness is folks bearing witness to our pain.
Yes, yes. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's a scary thing about sharing stories. I think sharing stories is a good thing, but then you have especially what we call them keyboard warriors in this world of social media, invalidating someone else's story, of saying, yeah, that couldn't have possibly happened to you. If there's one thing I've learned with lifing, is that the truth is stranger than fiction. Some stuff you hear and you're like, whoa,
Right.
okay. And as impossible as it sounds, it takes nothing away from you to be kind and be like, I'm sorry for that experience. You might not relate to it, it might not make sense to you, but it is that person's experience. And I wish we would do a lot less of invalidating or minimizing another person's experience simply because we cannot relate to it.
It's interesting you said something, and I think maybe we can build on it as we go along, is you said, I may not really understand it, but because I see your humanity, right, I get it. I imagine that this must be very difficult for you.
That.
There's something called post-traumatic growth, and the premise is that so when we talk about trauma, we always talk about the big dire things, right? But then also the things that trauma gives us, the impact of trauma, what it gives us, if we sit with it, is the experience of being empathetic to the stories of others.
That.
Right? To be curious about the story of others, to think, and this shit is hard for everyone.
It is.
Right?
It is.
Right? And so even when we think about the correlation between mental health and alcohol use, I think the ways to support folks who are in the throes of it or are in recovery, which, like you said, I believe is a lifelong thing, is building bridges of curiosity and care. And the other thing I think you talked about is how do we build community, right? I think it's being able to identify, and I'm paraphrasing what Brene Brown talks about shame, is identifying who is worthy to know our shame story.
Yeah.
Because not everybody has the capacity for it,
Sadly, yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the bigger challenge with that is how do you identify who is worthy of hearing your story? Because I'm talking about like intimate relationships, for example. When you share that story and then things go bad in that relationship, a lot of times you have people using that your story against you. You know, you hear stories of people who are like, he would tell me, oh, it's no wonder that this person did this and this and this to you because you're this and this and this. And so I think the question is, how then do you determine who is worthy of your story? Because all these things then interact to and impact that person's mental health and their ability to then go to the next relationship or to the next phase of their life with those shock absorbers.
Man, that just when you're describing that sort of level of betrayal,
That.
imagine, that was just heartbreaking. Imagining someone using your stuff and weaponizing that, right? And the question is, you never know someone can weaponize your shit.
That. Because when it starts, it's
Right.
all rosy, right?
Oh, that's the thing. So how you wouldn't know? I think what it is perhaps it's going into relationship knowing that even though there's a possibility that I will be heartbroken or someone will do things that are incredibly foul, it is not a reflection on me. Right? It's not it's that person. And so maybe when we're talking about mental health, perhaps, or mental health in relation to alcohol, and I think maybe we've moved to the other side, right? Is that where we are now?
Yes.
Is maybe some of the things that fortify us and help us make new friends as opposed to just having alcohol as a friend,
Yep.
is knowing how our story is our story, but we are more than just our story.